be dealing with something. Yeah, I'll take a different approach than yesterday, and I want to talk about those multi-community SIR models. And basically, what I would like to do is, in the first part, show how we can use the real data to try to reduce their complexity and make them more amenable for analysis, modeling, and things like this. And in the second part of the talk, I introduce another way of trying to, make sense of that complexity, which is based on the idea of viewing those contact matrices as elements of a random matrix ensemble. Okay. Okay. So to start with, some refreshers. I think by now you are all very familiar with the SIR model, but it never hurts. So this model is pretty old, right? And now you know that every person from being susceptible, can be infected and can recover. One way to look at it is that you imagine you have a solution with green bits, and at time 0, color 1 being red. And the game is that whenever a green particle meets a red one, it can become red itself. So I have like 8 beads in there. And so at a later time, what is the number of red beads? Well, to calculate the variation in the number of green beads, I just have to figure out for each of them what is the probability that they get in contact with a red bead and that the red bead pass the color, right? Probability to meet a red bead would be the concentration or the number density of the red bead. So it's 1/8 or I/n. And then the probability that this color is transmitted, I say it's beta time delta t. So this is the SIR model. And then you have one more step, which is the red bead can turn blue. And this is all of them, they have the same probability to become blue. So, all right. And then in the continuum, you get those equations. I would like to take a moment to look back at this equation, and maybe just for the sake of, yeah. So you've learned, I think, how to integrate those, and I would like to point out that if what you're interested about is just to know what are the value of S, I, and R that you're going to meet, you don't always need to integrate it. To see this, let me define here for a moment a function calling nu of t. And this function is formally defined as integral between 0 and time t, dt prime, beta I of t prime over n. Or if you don't like integral, another way to define this function is to say that its derivative is equal to that. So it's equal to beta I of t over n, and that at time 0, it's equal to 0. Two are writing the same thing. Okay, so if I take back this equation now and I write it down with this change of variable, what I have is it's equal to minus s times this d nu over dt, right? And you know how to integrate this. Basically, this says that S can be written as S of t is equal to the initial condition S at time 0 exponential minus nu of t. Okay, so if you take the derivative of S, you can verify it satisfies this differential equation. Okay, so this is one thing. Another thing we got, if I now look at the R equation, the one for the recovers individuals, I have dr over dt. It's equal to gamma I, right? So let's massage the equations a little bit to make this ratio appear. So this is equal to gamma times n over beta times beta I of t over n. And well, this in the end, you see, it's just gamma over n over gamma times n over beta, and this is the derivative of nu. So we have the derivative of r of t proportional to the derivative of nu of t. So if I integrate that, what I obtain is that r of t minus r times 0 is equal to gamma n over beta nu of t minus nu of 0, right? This is just the integration. And I've told you this is 0. In general, the number of recovered at the initial time could be anything, but just to simplify, I'm going to say, well, initially there is no recovered individual because it's a fresh population, so this is 0. So you just have r of t is equal to gamma n over beta times nu. And now I of t, well, it's simply the population number minus s and minus r. So minus as a0 exponential minus nu of t. And then minus r, it's minus gamma over n, gamma times n over beta times nu of t. Why did we do that? If I'm going to delete for a moment time, so I can say s is a function of nu. Right? And so nu is a number. So you know it starts from 0 and then it grows, right? So you can just, numerically, you have a function of nu for each of them and you can just evaluate them. And so by doing so, you can get what are the value of s, I, and r without doing the time integration. So this is good if you're interested in knowing what is the, the values of SIR during the course of the epidemic. But of course, the trade-off is that you don't really have the time resolution, right? You don't know the correspondence between nu and the actual times. So this is what interests you. You have a problem. But what you can do is simply notice that, well, if by definition, d nu of t is this beta I over n, right? So now if I substitute I by what I found here, what I obtain is it's equal to beta. So the n from there is 1. And then I have minus S0 over n exponential minus nu of t. And then I have this term here for the r. So beta over n times this is going to just give you minus gamma nu. This is a differential equation. So if you want to get the link between nu and t, you integrate that. What can we also learn? You can learn about the steady states, right? What is the endpoint of the epidemic? Well, by definition, the steady state is when, you can do it with what you've learned with Roberto and the previous teachers by saying that ds over dt, di over dt, dr over dt is equal to 0, that's fine. Or you can do it like this, d nu over dt is equal to 0, which means basically that you have this whole thing equal to 0. Oh, there's a gamma here, right? So you have nu of t is equal to 1 over gamma times this thing. So beta and then 1 minus S0 over n exponential minus nu of t. So this is the condition for having the steady state. And you can notice that, so maybe I should just say this should be the steady state, right? This is a function, let's call it phi of nu star. So this equation here means that nu star is a fixed point of this function phi. So a very simple numerical scheme, if you just want to know what is the final state, is you can make a sequence like this. You take a first guess, for example, nu 0 is equal to 0, and then you say nu 1 is equal to phi of nu 0, and then you form a sequence like this. Nu k plus 1 is equal to phi for, evaluated at your previous guess. And this is going to converge to the final new star. So eventually, if you iterate like this, you'll reach new star. So this is also more efficient than integrating this equation if you just want to know what's the end state. If you want to know all the intermediate states and know the correspondence with time, then there is no escape to integrate this. Okay, so this is what I wrote here. You have the R naught. These are the equations we just derived. This is the the relationship with the end state, and this is how the course of the epidemic would look like with the SIR variables, and how it looks like when you look at this exponential of minus new variable. Now I'm going to consider a variation. I'm going to introduce more cities, so communities. So I have n communities labeled A, B, C, for example, and each of them follow its own SIR dynamics. So you have its number of susceptible individuals, its own number of infected individuals, and its own number of recovered individuals. And they're going to interact together, right? So for example, you might have people visiting A. So maybe, the probability that one guy living in that city A meets somebody coming from the city B is going to be what I'm calling this probability of B to A. It's a probability that you're making the trip, basically. If I follow the same reasoning as I was, showing in the beginning, you can again, rationalize how you obtain a multi-community SIR model. So one more time, the variation of the number of susceptible individuals between small time interval, delta t, is going to be equal to, in average, so minus the number of susceptible individuals times the probability that each of those got infected, that you have to become infected. And if I break this down, the probability to get infected is the sum over all the neighboring town that you meet one of those visitors, and then that once you met that person, you become infected. So if you track the colors, those match. So the probability that you meet somebody from town B, which is infected, is first of all the probability that you meet a visitor of town B, and then among those, the probability that you meet somebody who is infected is this IB over NB. So you have this product. This is the yellow term. And then this probability of being infected once you've met this infected individual, it's the beta times delta t. So now, if I group this beta with these yellow terms, blue and yellow becomes sort of purple. And so this is this beta times AB, and then this one I kept it separate. So now if you, as usual, divide both sides by delta t, take the limit of this going to 0, you obtain a differential equation like this. So this would be the, what is called sometimes in the literature the patch model. And so you have basically a SIR model dynamics with different communities, and you have like effective transmission rates that you could relate to probability of traveling in the way I've just shown. And then you have like those normalizations. Number of people in each community, it has its own total number of people, right? So you have these objects, which I call here the transmission rate matrices. Yeah, okay. So these are more complex, of course. You can show, we'll give you as an exercise, show that those equations that I've shown for the patch model SIR, you can also make a reparametrization in the way I've shown here. It's a bit more involved, but it's basically the same idea. So you can show that you have SA is equal to SA at time 0 times exponential minus nu A of t, or then you have the number of recovered individuals is equal to gamma NA, the population numbers, sum over B, so all the towns, the inverse, matrix inverse of the transmission rate matrix, AB times nu B. And then you have IA is equal to NA minus those two terms, so minus SA0 exponential minus nu A minus this one, so gamma and A, sum over B, beta minus 1, AB, nu B. Okay, and clue, it's you define a vector nu A of t is equal to sum over B beta AB integral 0 to t dt prime IB of t prime over NB. Okay, so this is the analog of what I've shown, and if you do that and you work your way around, you'll arrive to this formula. And in the same way I've shown before, you can derive what is the ODIRI satisfied by d and d nu of t. This time I can have it for this vector. Well, by definition, it's equal to, the derivative is equal to what's under the integral sum. So you simply have sum over b beta AB IB of t over NB. But IB, you know it, right? It's coming from there. So you can just make those substitutions and you will arrive to sum over B beta AB 1 minus SB of 0 and B exponential minus nu B minus gamma nu A. So this is just using the expression that is in this line here, and then making a matrix vector product. I think you know how to make this. So this is a little bit more complex than the one we showed before, but not really, right? So we did the same thing. Well, and of course you can also determine the fixed point in the same way by iterations. So although it's more complex, if you know the beta matrix, you can tell a lot just with this transformation. So this is what I wrote on the blackboard. This is if you make the stationary condition from this equation, then you obtain this. And this you can have the same scheme that I was showing you there, where you write it under this form and you just iterate, and you reach to what should be the final state for this epidemic. What is R naught? It should be equal to the maximum of the eigenvalue of the contact matrix divided by gamma. Just accept it for now, because we'll come back to it in later in the class, so I'm not going to show it twice. And this is for an example. If you had a system with two cities, for example, the beta matrix could be this one. It's not necessarily symmetric. This is basically telling you that people only get infected by the other communities, not inside. And then the rate of infection from B to A and from A to B are different. One is 1 and one is R0 squared. And if you try to solve it with this method, then you get this graph. And if you try to relate it to time, then you get this one, right? And the dashed and the solid lines are the two different cities. Okay. So now, how do we simplify this? I don't know if you noticed, but I've introduced this big matrix. So if you have n communities, you have n square parameters. And I don't know how many cities you want to study in Brazil, for example, but if you take 1,000 of them, that's 1,000,000 parameters, right? So it starts to be a lot, and it might be difficult to choose them or justify what is their values. So how can we make progress? Well, one way is to think, well, can we use some data that encodes human behavior, how they move, and this is something I'm presenting that we did a couple of years ago, where we took mobility data. So mobility data means companies aggregate cell phone tracking data, and then they sell it to people. So we use that. And so this is a map of the United States where you have 1,000 coarse-grained communities that you could imagine as cities or something like this. They have about the same number of individuals in each of those. And the data we have then is that we have some sort of measurement of the daily number of people from a given city A traveling to B and coming back. It's like commuting, basically, you know. So let's say that FAB is the number of A residents which visited city B during that day and came back home at night. And you know, those fluxes make some sort of sense. For example, if you sum all of those edges, so all the fluxes, and I plot them as a function of time, you see this, you know. So any idea what this dip could be here? Yeah. It's in March 2020, so it was the onset of the pandemic. So it's when the government say you have to stay home. And so people could not move anymore, so the flux collapsed, right? So, well, okay. All right. So how do we use those fluxes to simplify our model? So this slide is a bit complicated, I realize, so I'm going to try to show you different calculations. Where did I put the... So again, I'm going to look at the variation of number of susceptible individuals between, you know, T plus delta T and T in community A. So what is this variation? Well, on the one hand, each of those susceptible individuals, they could become infected because of their own infected people in their own city, right? So what is that? I would have the probability to meet somebody. And as usual before, times the probability that this somebody is infected. And then times the probability that the infection occur, right? So this I'm going to call it P. So it's basically how many people you meet when you go about your day. This, for this city, is going to be the fraction, what is the probability that a person you meet is infected is just IA over NA, right? And then the probability that the infection occurs is, as before, beta times delta T. Those are the local contribution. But you have other contribution. Now you have people traveling from, for example, people visiting from other cities. So I would get, to count those, I would have to, you know, say, well, SA again, and then sum over all the contribution from different cities, different from A. And then what does this look like? Well, the probability of meeting someone is going to be equal to P times, well, it's P times you meet somebody in your city which is actually coming from somewhere else, right? So this fraction that this person is from somewhere else should be something like FAB over NA, right? FAB is the number of travelers from B which are in A at that time. And then if you divide by the total size of the city, you have your chance that you meet those visitors. So these two are represent this probability. Then the probability that the someone you met from city B is infected, it's simply going to be, well, IB over NB, right? Because over there, that is the probability that someone is infected. And then you have still your beta times delta T. So these are the visitors' contribution. And then we have more contribution. We have all the little explorers who are in the city A. So all those susceptible who decided to travel somewhere else. So we have this time minus, summing over, again, all the cities, B different from A. What is the number of susceptible that we're considering here? the number of people who might become infected? Well, it's SA, but not all of those, right? Because only those which travel. So the fraction of the susceptible which travel somewhere else is going to be equal to FBA over NA, right? FBA is the number of people from A which visited B. Divide by NA, it's a fraction of the city which is away in city B at the time. And then I have to, again, do my little game. What is the probability that you meet someone infected when you're away in B? Well, it's going to be the probability to, again, meet someone, and then IB over NB. And then the beta times delta T. And those would be the explorers' contributions. So now I lay down everything, right? So I can group the terms. So basically, I have SA T plus delta T minus SA. I'm going to keep the local case separate for now. So the first line was in the end minus SA P beta times delta T IA over NA, okay. And I have a sum running basically on all the cities different from A. I can isolate SA in each of those. And then I have something, so something. And usually in both lines I see I have IB over NB, right? So I'm just going to write it here. And in both lines, I have P2, so I can extract P as well. So the first line gives me, it seems to be like it's a fraction. It's FAB plus FBA over NA. So from there, I want to define, this thing should be my beta AB, right? And this thing here should be my, oh, there is a delta T. And this thing here should be my diagonal term. And once you have made the substitution, we're back on the model I was describing before. Except that now the beta, they have like values which are given by that. So you have the diagonal terms beta AA, which are simply B, P times beta. And then you have the off-diagonal terms, which are given by what I wrote there. So P, beta, and then FAB plus FBA over NA. Okay. So when we did that, what happened is the fluxes are measurements now, right? So they are known and known. And so, okay, so we have this. And basically, we went from a model where we had n-square variables or parameters to a model where we just have one free parameter left, namely this P. Right? So that's a huge dimension reduction of the problem. And for example, this with the data we had, this is how the matrix beta would look like. I don't know if you can tell much from looking at it, but this is how it looks. So now what does it mean to calibrate the model? Instead of adjusting n-square variable, I only adjust one. And how are you going to adjust it? Well, you want maybe to adjust it so that it reproduces some of the reported cases of COVID. Right? And then it means the parameter P is calibrated. And then you can use the model to predict new things. So in a nutshell, this is what you can do. You can define some sort of cost function which tries to minimize the epidemic size, that the model is telling you have, minus the one that you actually observed. And this number here depends on P, of course, for each time, but you're going to adjust it so that this is minimum. And so as a result, at every new time point, you get a different value of p, which are those circles, right? So you have like a p of t, which is varying every day, basically. And for example, here in red are reported cases of COVID in the US, and this is, the blue line is the prediction by the calibrated model. So you don't have a perfect agreement because it was, I mean, you have one free parameter, so you cannot have a perfect match, but the trend is correct. And you can see here maybe this parameter p actually has a very physical sense, right? As I said before, it represents the probability that you meet someone. And so what happened is that it drops tremendously because people were locked down in place, and so people stopped meeting people. By how much? Well, by about there was a 5-fold reduction in that frequency. Okay? This is like if you want to compare, the detail. So like you have each color is a time point, each point is a city, and you're comparing what was the model, what the model is telling you versus what was actually measured. So you have a pretty good agreement. If you try something wide, like saying, well, I'm going to try something new. I'm going to pretend some of the fluxes in the matrix were 0, for example, between cities which are far apart. So you're distorting the reality, then it doesn't agree anymore, right? So it means that the way we constructed this matrix using fluxes capture the reality to a good extent, okay? All right. Do I have any more things to say? Okay, so what was the point here? As I think the point is to show you that those models can be very complex, but we live in a world where we have a lot of data available, so it's a good idea to try to reduce the number of parameters as much as possible with the real data, and then try to fit your models, calibrate them, things like this. And I think the idea for this project initially was to say, well, in weather forecasting, for example, like in the beginning of the 20th century, you were just recording, I don't know, the days when you had rains and by how much. And so looking at that, you get some statistics of how much rain you should expect for the months of March next year, right? And in COVID, what we did when we were like reporting the number of cases was pretty much the same, right? You just, okay, well, we had this many cases today, and then this was the trend, and so you had graphs like this. But the weather forecasting system, like, it improved a lot, right? Like today you have like animated map telling you, well, this is the forecast for the rain forecast for the next few days. And that's what we want to build with epidemiological models. So in the same way that the atmospheric models are very complex, and to make them work, to produce those maps, you have to use a lot of sensors on the, scattered everywhere on the territories, like measuring the composition of the atmosphere, the humidity, and stuff like that. And all this is input in their very complicated models, but it works to some extent. And so maybe we can do something similar where all this mobility data could be seen as real-time measurements that feed those large models and give you some short-term forecast for the spread of epidemics. Okay. Any question? I'm going to change part a bit. Okay. So this was an example where we used, my point here was showing that how to try to use real data, but maybe sometimes you don't have real data available, or you don't see yourself as a data scientist, so you don't want to dig into those very big databases. Or maybe it's just not possible to acquire the data, then you have to come up with different ideas. And I'm going to show an example, which is similar to what Roberto was talking about the other day, what's happening in the early time of the epidemic. So what's happening in the early time of the epidemic? So if I consider again this patch model, right, very complicated. I'm saying, well, I'm interested at what's happening initially. Initially, the number of susceptible persons is very close to the total population size, and the number of infected individuals is very close to 0 because that's the beginning. And so the way to write this mathematically is maybe to say, well, you have basically a SA which is equal to 1 minus XA times the population, and IA is equal to YA times the population, and both of those X and YAs are very small. Okay, so this is what I'm going to write down, and then let's see what we can, what insight we can get from there. So I'm just going to use those new functions X and Y into the original equations. So let's compute the derivative of Y of t, YA of t. Well, by definition, this is equal to 1 over NA times the derivative of the number of infected individuals there. But this is given by the, it's not here, but one of the equations for with the I equation for the SIR. So it's going to be equal to 1 over NA time SA sum over B beta AB YB over NB, and then minus gamma time IA, right? So this is, if I make the substitution now, this is, I said Y minus XA and A. This, we said it's YA and A. And this, this would be B's. And this would be YA time NA. So I just put them in. So I would get 1 minus XA sum over B beta AB YB minus gamma YA. Right? This one here killed this one and the one over there. Okay, now let me develop. You have here like a sum, but I'm going to expand this with this the product with this one. So I've got sum over B beta AB YB minus sum over B beta AB XA YB minus gamma YA. This, you see, there is a product of two functions which are very small. So this is called second order. This, there is only one of them, so it's first order. And this one here, too, you have only one term, so it's first order. So what's happening is I'm going to say, well, it's the beginning of the epidemic, so those two functions are very small, and I'm only going to retain the terms up to the first order, so I'm dropping this one out. So you're left with just a differential equation for YA, which depends only on you know, YB and YA. So you have in the end dYA over dt is equal to sum over B beta AB YB minus gamma YA. And this you can also write it maybe as you know, vector as under vector notation as something like this. D capital Y over dt is equal to matrix B times Y minus gamma Y. So here Y is a column vector which is Y1 YA until the last community, right? And this matrix here is the matrix which has the beta 1, 1, beta 1, 2, and all of these, all of the betas. Okay, so we've done that. B is a square matrix, so in principle it can be diagonalized. Diagonalized means that you have the eigenvalue decomposition and that you assume that B can be written as a matrix U, which is square, time a diagonal matrix with you know, diagonal elements lambda 1, lambda 2 until lambda n, and then the inverse of the matrix U. And if you are, you know, if you've done some of these yourselves, you know that the U matrix define a change of base, basically, in space. And so you can change your variables, and you could define, for example, new variable y prime 1, y prime a, y prime n. So this would be a new variable, capital Y prime. And this is equal to, I'm defining at U minus 1 times Y. So you multiply this square matrix by Y. These are your new variables. It's just a change of base. So if U was an orthogonal matrix, it's a rotation, for example. So you're just rotating your base. Okay, so let's see. If I take the derivative of Y prime, well, what is this equal to? By definition, it's U minus 1 times dy over dt. Well, dy over dt, I've said it's equal to that thing, right? So I have U minus 1 times b, y, minus gamma U minus 1, y. And I can further introduce the decomposition again that I had for b. So it's b times u times the diagonal matrix times u minus 1 times y minus gamma u minus 1 times y. And here you might, not, again using what we introduced before, this is the identity matrix. And this, we just say it was y prime. And these two. So in the end, we obtained that it's simply a diagonal matrix times y prime minus gamma y prime. Okay, so this one follows its own equation with a matrix B. And once you turn and change the base, you get a similar equation, but this time the matrix is diagonal. So this is under a matrix format, but so let's see. If I look at one line, for example, if you make the product of the diagonal matrix with a vector, you'll see it's pretty easy. You're just putting the lambda 1 with the coefficient of line 1, lambda 2 with the coefficient of line 2, and etc. Right? So if I write this down, what I achieved here is that d alpha prime over dt is equal to lambda alpha times y prime alpha minus gamma y prime alpha. This is a first order differential equation. So basically, this is equivalent to saying that each of the y alpha prime evolves according to y alpha prime 0 exponential lambda alpha minus gamma t. Okay. But now let's use the, let's say I want to go back to my initial variables, right? So I know like the universal transformation of this is going to be y is equal to u times y prime. This is the opposite transformation. I'm rotating in the other direction to go back to the initial variables. So if I write this with my variables in each line of the vector, what this is telling me is that I have this is equal to the matrix product of u with the vector y prime. So it's sum over alpha of u a alpha times y prime alpha of t. But this we just solved, right? So it's here. So in fact, I have sum over alpha u a alpha times the y alpha prime at 0, and then times the exponential term. This is just a coefficient, right? So just to simplify, let me call it C alpha. And you see I have a sum here. What I'm going to do is, among those lambda, there is one which must be the largest, right? So I'm going to factorize this term out. And so I'm going to say, well, this is equal to, I'm going to take the maximum of the lambda, so which happens for some alpha max. So I have exponential lambda alpha max minus gamma of t. And then I would have 1 plus the sum over all the alpha which were different from alpha max of this divided by that, right? So I have C alpha over C alpha max exponential where down? Okay. exponential minus lambda max, lambda alpha max, minus lambda alpha of t. So if you look a moment at this, by definition, because this is the largest lambda, the largest eigenvalue, what's into this exponential here is negative. And as t grows, this is becoming more and more negative. And the exponential function, when you go toward minus infinity, it goes to 0. So basically, all the terms in this sum here, they are going to 0. So as time grows, these things become basically equivalent to just this C alpha max time exponential lambda max minus gamma of t. Okay? And so from there, the epidemic will grow if and only if. Well, it will grow only if what's in this exponential here before the t is positive. Otherwise, it will also go to 0. But so the condition is that I have to have lambda max minus gamma is larger than 0. Or if you want, put gamma back and on the right and divide by gamma. R naught is equal to lambda max over gamma is larger than 1. So by doing this, early time analysis, it's a sort of linear stability analysis, like Professor Krankel was showing earlier. And so you get what is the condition for the epidemic to grow. And in this context, the condition is that lambda max over gamma, which is the R naught, basically, is larger than 1. And this basically should tell you, well, it means for big systems, it's good to know what is the maximum eigenvalue, right? Okay. So this example was to motivate, maybe to try to give you a hint why it is, of interest to analyze the spectral properties of these big matrices. Spectral properties means the eigenvalues, basically. So it could mean, if you know this matrix, well, you can just do the eigenvalue decomposition and you have it. But if you, maybe, as I said before, you don't really have that matrix and you want to see it as a random matrix element, well, then you maybe want to know what is the statistics of the maximum eigenvalue, right? And so this will tell you what are the chances that an epidemic will grow or that it will die out or that it won't start. Okay. All right. And so this, if you're interested in this, actually a similar, this was in the context of random matrices, was motivated by a very, not so recent paper, but a very good one in the context of ecology. And here the question is similar in the sense that it's an equation very close to the SIR, but it's in the context of interacting species. When the species interact together, like you have tiger predating on rabbits and things like this. When will a system like this be unstable and one of the species be driven to extinction or not? Right. So those are related problems, and the conclusion is also that you have to look at the spectrum of the matrix. Okay. So I've been talking about random matrices, but what do I mean? And so I want to now spend a bit of time to give you a little introduction to random matrices. It's a very deep field, so of course we won't go through everything, but I think this is an instructive example to understand some of their properties. So what is the setting? The setting is the following. I'm giving you a 2x2 real square symmetric matrix. So symmetrics mean that I only have 3 variables in it, x1, x2, and x3. And where is the randomness? Well, the randomness, I'm going to tell, well, x1 and x2, they are going to be independent variable drawn from a Gaussian distribution with unit variance. And x3 is going to be a Gaussian random variable as well, but with a variance which is 1/2. Okay. you'll see later why it's 1/2, but trust me for now. And I'm asking 2 questions. The first question I'm asking is, what is the joint probability distribution of the 2 eigenvalues, right? So eigenvalues, here I had n eigenvalues, in this problem I have 2. But what is their probability distribution after all, right? Because it's related to the question I was showing here. Second question is, what is the distribution of the gap between them? Because in this here, I will have a minimum and a maximum, but so if I want to know the maximum, it might be a good idea to start also with determining this gap. Okay. So this calculation is going to, take a little bit, but I hope I won't make any mistake. All right. So let me start with, we have this matrix A. It's equal to x1, x2, x3, like this. Well, you may or you may not know, but I'm telling you, any symmetric real matrix can be diagonalized, and the general form is similar to what I've shown there. But basically, it has to be of the form an orthogonal 2x2 matrix. And in 2 dimensions, an orthogonal 2x2 matrix is written like this: cos theta, sine theta, or minus sine theta, cos theta. Then you will have the 2 eigenvalues. So this is a diagonal matrix. And then you have the transpose of that one. So the transpose here is going to be equal to cos theta minus sine theta, and sine theta cos theta. Okay, so basically I just told you I can substitute 3 variables, x1, x2, x3, for 3 different variables. 2 of them are the eigenvalues, and one of them is theta, which is the angle that characterizes the rotation of this orthogonal matrix. Okay, I can maybe simplify. I think it simplifies a little bit more. I'm going to introduce mu, which would be the average of those 2 eigenvalues, lambda 1 plus lambda 2 over 2. And then I'm going to introduce like some sort of difference, psi, equal to lambda 1 minus lambda 2 over 2. And so the reverse transformation is going to be that lambda 1 is equal to mu plus psi, and lambda 2 is equal to mu minus psi. Okay. So in particular, if I make this substitution here, I'm going to have, so same matrix, and then here I'm going to have mu plus psi, 0, 0, mu minus psi. And then same matrix here. And now this I can separate. This matrix is going to be equal to mu times the identity matrix minus psi times a matrix which has 1 and minus 1 in the diagonal. So this is simply going to be equal to mu times the identity matrix, right? Because the product of these two together is equal to the identity matrix as well. And then I will have psi times those 2 rotation matrices, the first rotation matrix. Then I have this diagonal matrix I was talking about with 1 and minus 1 on the diagonal. And then I have this one, right, which is cos theta minus sin theta, sine theta, cos theta. Okay. So far, I've just basically went from those, I've changed the variables into lambda 1, lambda 2, theta, and then again into mu, psi, and theta. Just, you will see later why it makes it simpler. Any questions over? Okay, so let's continue now. Well, I've defined some sort of transformation. Basically, I've said that this x1, x2, x3 is basically some function h of mu, psi, and theta, right? And that's basically what I've written here. You can make this matrix product, and you would get an expression of x1, which depends on mu, psi, and theta, and the same for x2 and x3. And why is it useful? Because if I write the probability distribution of the variable x1, x2, and x3, well, how do you change variable for this distribution? And you write the PDF for the other three variables. Maybe like a memotechnic way is to, well, if you add this infinitesimal volume element to it, this whole thing is a probability that you are in a volume element center on those three variables, right? So this, you can see it as P of x1 of, new variable, x2 of new variable, x3 of new variables. And then here, I need to take some sort of derivatives of the old variables with respect to the new variables. And then I will have the differentials for the new variables. And by identification with what I wrote here, this whole thing would be the probability distribution written for the new variables. And this thing here, actually, this thing here is the Jacobian. Okay, and this should be like the absolute value of the Jacobian. So actually, yeah, it's a determinant of the Jacobian. Okay. So what is the Jacobian here? Well, really the Jacobian is a matrix in which elements are the partial derivatives like dxi, so the old variable divided by the new variable x prime j. So in each line you're looking at one of the old variables, and each column you differentiate by one of the new variables. In my case, the old variables are x1, x2, x3. And the new variables are lambda, mu, and theta, right? So you just have to do this product. Fortunately, it's easy to do because you can, yeah, maybe I should write it down. So, yeah. What I have from there is x1, x2, x3. So I get mu here, right, of course. And if you make this product, you'll see that you get mu plus psi cosine 2 theta. And here's mu minus psi cosine of 2 theta. And then you would have psi sine 2 theta on, and this you would have, so this is symmetric, right? So this is x1 expressed as a function of the three new variables. This is x2 and this is x3. So if I compute the Jacobians, okay, first line, I'm taking x1 and I'm going to derive it in turn with respect to mu, psi, and theta. Okay, first column, I take the derivative with respect to mu, it's 1. Second column, I take the derivative with respect to psi, so I got cosine 2 theta. Third column, I take the derivative with respect to theta, so I get minus 2 psi times sine 2 theta. Okay, now I look at x2, this one. It's going to be very similar, so I'm just going to write it down. It's going to be 1 minus cos 2 theta, and then plus 2 sine theta. 2, yeah. And then the last one, x3, it doesn't depend on mu, on mu. Derivative with respect to psi is sine 2 theta. Derivative with respect to theta is equal to 2 psi cosine 2 theta. Okay, I've said for this, I need to write what is the determinant of this matrix. So here the determinant of J, I don't know how you want to calculate it, but you could do a column expansion. So you would have 1 time the determinant of this square, so minus cos 2 theta, and then 2 sine 2 theta. And then I have the second coefficient on that line, so minus 1 times the square with these two elements on top, minus 2 sine theta, 2 theta. And then the bottom are those two elements. Okay, so maybe you notice something is like those two determinants, they're basically the same except that the sign in the first line is different. So they're going to have opposite sign. And so because of the minus here, it's going to be equal to twice this one, for example. So I'm going to have twice times this determinant, which you'll get, you can make the calculation, is minus 2 psi. So in the end, I got minus 4 psi is the determinant of this whole thing. And one last thing. Here, I need to express this p x1, x2, x3 as a function of the new variables. So what is p x1, x2? Well, I don't know if you remember, but I said they were, I showed, it's on the slide, they have Gaussian distribution, right? So, and they are independent, so it's going to be the product of each of those probability distribution. And Gaussian probability distribution are as such that you would get 1 over 2 pi exponential minus x1 square plus x2 square over 2 times 1 over square root of pi exponential minus x3 square. So in the end here, I simply have 1 over 2 pi to the power 3 half exponential minus x1 square plus x2 square over 2 minus extra square. So if I want to compute what's in this exponential, x1 square plus x2 square plus 2x3 square. I'm just going to make the substitution, right? It's mu plus psi cos 2 theta square. Then the x2 is mu minus psi cos 2 theta square. And then the plus 2 2 psi square sine square 2 theta. So you can see here, for the two first, the cross terms are going to cancel out with each other. So you would have 2 mu square plus 2 x square cos square. And then you're going to have the cosine identity. So in the end, you get 2 mu square plus 2 psi square. OK, so now I'm ready to write this down eventually. So basically, what I obtain is that this thing in yellow, P, the probability distribution of mu, psi, and theta is equal to, so just write it down. The first one is 1 over 2 pi to the power 3 half. Then I have the exponential, which is now reads exponential minus mu square exponential minus psi square. And then I have the absolute values of this determinant, which is so 4 psi. And so I'm going to take this 4 out. And 2. What time is it? All right. Now I'm in a spot to answer question 1. So question 1 was what is the distribution of the eigenvalues? All right, so first of all, well, to change to the distribution of the eigenvalues, I might have to do again the same change of variable. I would write p lambda 1, lambda 2 theta is equal to p of lambda 1 of mu, psi, and theta, and lambda 2, same way, theta, times the absolute value of the determinant of the Jacobian of the transformation, which is d lambda 1, lambda 2, theta over d mu, psi, theta. Okay, I wrote it here, right? So you just have to take these are the expression of lambda 1 as a function of the new variables. So if you take the derivative with respect to mu, you'll get 1 here, and then 1, and 1 and minus 1. So, so this is going to be equal to the absolute value of the determinant, which is going to be d1 over d mu, I say it's 1. d1 over psi, it's 1. d1 over theta, it's 0. And then I have 1 minus 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. So this thing is simply equal to minus 2. So in the end, I get p lambda 1, lambda 2, and theta is equal to that. Exponential mu square plus psi square, you can see it will give you yeah, mu square plus psi square will be the first line, so it will give you lambda 1 square over 2. Mu square minus psi square would give you lambda 2 square over 2. So I get minus lambda 1 square plus lambda 2 square over 2. This thing here now is the absolute value of psi, which is lambda 1 minus lambda 2 over 2. And then this thing here, the determinant is just 2. So if I just drop the normalization for now, so you see this is equal to some normalization constant time exponential minus lambda 1 square plus lambda 2 square over 2 times the absolute value of lambda 1 minus lambda 2. So the first part, it may seem like it's Gaussian, but then you have this additional term, which is the absolute value of lambda 1 minus lambda 2. So this, okay, this is the answer. This is normalization in this case. And for the second answer, yeah, I think I have time to do it. Okay, so to get this thing right, you will need to integrate over theta, of course. And so since this doesn't depend on theta, it's easy. You just multiply by 2 pi. And so this is how you will get the right normalization. Okay, so let's now talk about the spacing. To talk about the spacing, it seems natural for me to try to get the probability distribution of psi, right, that I define. So basically what I want is I want to compute the probability of psi, which is equal to the integral over mu, integral over d theta, of the joint probability distribution of mu, psi, and theta. So this is what I wrote here. And sorry, this thing here is there, right? The integral over mu is easy. It's just a Gaussian weight. So you would get square root of pi. So you would get anyway, you would get, so 2 over pi to the power 3/2 times the integral over mu, which, as I said, is square root of pi, so pi to the power 1/2. And then you have integral over theta, which is, again, here just 2 pi. And then what's left is just the psi square term, right? Okay. There must be like somewhere here like a factor problem, because it seems like this should be 1/2. Okay, so I made an error somewhere. Okay, you can try to find out. So this is 1/2 pi. Yeah? And so this gives you simply psi exponential minus psi square. So this is the final thing. And now to get the spacing distribution, I can simply write, well, the probability that the spacing S is in a, is in a small interval S plus ds. Well, this is equal to the probability that, either it's lambda 1, which is larger, in which case you have, so this is 2 psi. So either psi is equal to lambda 1 minus lambda 2 over 2, which is in the interval S over 2 plus ds over 2. Or it's the other way around, and it's lambda 2, which is bigger, in which case you have psi, which is equal to lambda 1 minus lambda 2 over 2, is in an interval of size, minus s over 2 minus ds over 2 minus s over 2. And, well, those are you can check, those are, by definition, equal to the probability density function of psi times the size of this small interval. So this is simply p that psi is equal to s over 2 times ds over 2 plus the probability that psi is equal to minus s over 2 times ds over 2. P of psi is symmetric, so in fact you just have 2 times probability that psi is equal to s over 2. And if you just make the substitution in that, you will obtain that you have the probability, therefore, P of s is equal to 1/2 s exponential minus a squared divided by 4. Okay. Yeah, it took a little bit of time. So this is the second answer. Yeah, so S is a real number now, so it's just this one. Is a positive number. Okay, so this is a little bit long, but I think it's instructive because it's the basics of this whole field. And so if you're able to read it yourself, you get the gist of what are the results I'm going to show now. So how does this generalize? Well, how do you define random matrix ensemble? You could do it like as I showed you at the beginning, say, well, each of the entries is basically distributed independently in this matrix. So x1, x2, x3 are independently distributed, so that would be this red circle. Or you could say, well, I have some sort of way of weighting the matrices, but what I want is that, in fact, it doesn't really depend on the theta, the orthogonal matrix, the distribution. So that if you just rotate it, it's the same probability, meaning that, in fact, the probability distribution only depends on the eigenvalues. And it's another way to construct random matrix ensemble, and that's also true in my case. So the Gaussian ensemble is really a unique ensemble which is at the intersection of those two. This is the generalization of what I wrote initially about each entry being distributed independently according to Gaussian weights. Okay, so this is just the product of those. And this is the generalization of the result for question 1, when you have n larger than 2. Then you have this product of absolute values of the difference between the pairs of eigenvalues. This normalization number here, this normalization, you can compute it by saying that you want the integral over p of lambda 1 and lambda n equal to 1. And so basically, this becomes the integral of all the lambda n's, exponential of the 1/2 of the sum of the lambda I square, which is here. And then you can exponentiate this term, and you get this sum here. And just for the people coming from physics here, this is actually the partition function of a real physical systems. So in this partition function, you have a quadratic potential, which confines coordinates near to 0. And then you have these terms, which encode some sort of repulsion between different particles. And actually, this term here corresponds to the electrostatic potential for charges living in a 2D, so on a plane. And so this is basically the same thing as saying that you have a 2D fluid of charges constrained to a line and in a confining well. And so if you wanted to study this physical system, that's the exact same partition function, which is a curiosity. Okay. How does this result here for the gaps generalize? Well, it doesn't hold exactly, but this is actually remains pretty close. The exact generalization for large n is difficult to express analytically, but this thing here remains a very good approximation, as you can see on this plot. So in red is this function, and in blue is you take some ensemble and you compute the gaps, and you get something like this. It's called the Wigner-Dyson statistics. It's very different from other statistics. For example, if I was telling you I'm giving you n independent variables, if all the lambdas are independent and they have the same distribution, but they are not correlated, because here the charge repel each other, so they are strongly correlated. But if I'm just making a system when they're not correlated, you would get what's called the Poisson statistics. And it's different because you see, like in the first case for the red, the probability of the gap to be 0 is 0. So you won't find any charge or any eigenvalue which are collapsing on together. They won't have the same value. With the Poisson statistics, the probability that they have actually a 0 gap is pretty high. So it's completely different physics or mathematics. Okay. I'm interested something else which is fundamental in this field is the density of eigenvalues, which is basically the number density of eigenvalue at a given position lambda. So just counting how many of your eigenvalue land in a small interval centered around lambda. Well, for large n, this converges to a circle. It's called the Wigner semicircle, and it's a very unique result in its way. You won't see a distribution which looks like this very often. And so the picture you have in mind is that this axis are the eigenvalues, and they are all distributed on this line, and the weights are described by this Wigner C, or semicircle. Okay, so this was a bit math heavy, but to give you some example, this is the calculation we did on the board together. So this is one example of random matrix I generated. So the colors represent the value, of the random variable. And then with the computer, I can, diagonalize it, calculate the gaps. or calculate, and then I do it many times. I draw several thousand matrices, and then I compute the distributions of the gap and the distribution of the density of the eigenvalues. So this is exactly the results we did together. The red line is this formula. And here you see what you expect is a semicircle, but what we have is this blue line. And the reason is that this is because I said the previous result hold for large n, so we're not at large n yet. And actually the fact that on this part it doesn't agree is because you have extreme value statistics. It's the fluctuation of the largest eigenvalue, which becomes smaller and smaller as you go to large n. So this is a 2x2 matrix. This is 4x4. This is 8x8. And this is 16x16. And this is 64x64. And this is 1000x1000. So here, at that point, you completely recover the semicircle. Okay. So in the last 10 minutes, I'm just going to maybe focus on the application to epidemiology. So this is the matrix I've shown earlier. What is, for example, the beta matrix we had when we were using the fluxes measured, right, for the people moving around. Well, let's look at the gap statistics, right? So in the circles are actually the actual gaps in the eigenvalues. So the statistics for the measurements, right? The experimental matrices, and the color is like when you take this beta matrix at different times, because the fluxes are time dependent, right? Every day they change. In red, I've put the same Wigner-Dyson distribution, and in red, it's in green, it's the Poisson statistics. And what you observe is basically it's sort of in between. So initially, it's closer to the Gaussian ensemble statistics, and then when you go to larger gaps, it's somehow merge onto the Poisson statistics. Okay, fine. What can we do with it? Well, something which is natural maybe for all of you is if you want to mitigate an epidemic, is the notion of quarantine, right? So let's say I have my cities, so A, B, C, and I have a D, which is very far away. So in principle, I have fluxes, right? So I have F, A, C, F, A, B, and then I have some fluxes too from F, A, D. Well, and I can say if I want to mitigate the epidemics, I'm going to define some sort of cutoff or radius. So let's call this RC or DC, distance cutoff. And I'm going to say, well, if the cities are separated by a distance larger than, I don't know, many miles or 200 kilometers, I'm going to set that flux to 0. If I say this, it's basically I'm enforcing a quarantine. I'm saying, well, you guys are not allowed to travel more than 200 miles away from your home. And I could say, okay, I have my matrix, so it's easy for me to do this, and then I get a new beta matrix, and I can study the statistics of this new matrix. I can also use the patch model to compute what should be the final epidemic size. I just do this stationary state calculation, and I get the final size of the epidemic. And maybe as you all expect, when DC starts, is very large, you have a given epidemic size that I call omega naught. And when you decrease DC, eventually, people can't move. So at some point, if DC is equal to 0, the epidemic cannot propagate, right? And then the epidemic size omega should be 0. But in between, the epidemic size is going to go progressively from what it was before to something which is converging to 0. So when I'm decreasing DC from there to there, the epidemic size goes from being large to 0. At the same time, what's happening to the beta matrix when I'm doing this is that it goes from being close to the Wigner-Dyson distribution on that end, and it becomes more and more similar to this green line, the Poisson statistics. And so of course, here I'm looking at it, concomitantly with the fact that I'm using this quarantine idea. But I think this raises some interesting questions. Maybe after all, the best idea is not to base your mitigation policies on distance, but maybe a good idea would be to try to change the random matrix ensemble of your fluxes matrix, of your beta matrix. Maybe you can design more clever mitigation policy without having to impose very harsh restriction like this, but by just trying to change the random matrix ensemble that your beta matrix is in. And so here, you start with your beta matrix, and the point is that it's a different type of criterion to mitigate the propagation of the epidemic and to reach smaller epidemic sizes. Do you have more to show? Okay. Well, maybe, so this was about, initially I've said, like the important thing in my original example was the largest eigenvalues, right? Here I focused the talk on mostly all of the eigenvalues, but I'm not going to show it now then, but you can actually show that this maximum eigenvalues also have some well-characterized distribution, and this is something also that to keep in mind. Like the size of your network is going to enter into play when you're going to try to estimate what is the typical width of the fluctuation of the maximum eigenvalue. Right? In the same way that here, it was getting away from the Wigner semicircle for small n. It's because the fluctuation of the maximum eigenvalues are, the typical fluctuation are bigger. Whereas for large n, they are suppressed because of this scaling. Okay, so I think we're, I'm reaching an hour and a half mark, so I'll stop there. In conclusion, I think what I really wanted to convey is that you have different ways to think about those complex systems. Of course, you can try to inform them with real data. That's a perfectly good and reasonable approach. But whenever this is not available, you have to maybe think about other ways, and which are probably not rooted on real data anymore. And this is one of them. It's not the only one, but if that got you interested in the field of random matrices, I think that would be a success. And so thank you. And if you have any question, let me know.